Hi, everyone. Well, this is a really exciting panel. Thank you, and it's an honor to be on stage with public servants such as yourselves. Thank you for the introduction. In terms of the scope for today, obviously the timing of this is significant around the U.S. and securing its competitive position in terms of the global landscape. Stablecoin industry exceeding $200 billion in terms of market cap, public blockchains of over $3 trillion now in terms of representation. DeFi continuing to churn away as is. We have 30 minutes, so I want to make sure that we make the most of the time. Before we go into any of the specific questions, it would be great to hear some opening remarks in terms of your views around the U.S. and its positioning and priorities in the coming year and years to come. I'd like to start with Senator Gillibrand.
Well, hello, everybody. It's good to be here again. The size of the attendees keeps growing, although I've noticed they're all in the reception area, not in here, which is fine because they will watch it online. I just want to recognize the moment we're in. We are in a moment where we are building bipartisan consensus in the U.S. Senate and in the U.S. House of Representatives. That is an unusual thing when you're talking about an issue of first impression, something so important as building a regulatory framework for a growing and innovating industry. And if you just look at the last few votes, we had a committee hearing in the Senate in banking, widely bipartisan support. Several of us wrote the bill and continued to edit it through the markup. It is a very strong bill. It has a lot of protections. It is going to create rules of the road for stable coins. Simple things like you have to be one-to-one dollar backed. You have to have oversight by federal and state regulators. The regulatory frameworks have to be similar. And there are yearly reporting requirements. So it really creates safety and soundness. It creates protections against money laundering and illicit finance. It creates, to make sure there's no race to the bottom, that there's a regulatory floor, which is very important. And it really uses common sense. The people that I worked with to look at the bill are regulatory attorneys from all different areas of the law to really try to troubleshoot what could happen in this industry. For example, there's a great deal of protections under a bankruptcy scenario. If there was run on a stable coin, how do you prevent that from destabilizing the industry or the financial markets? And so we really try to think of all the possible scenarios and what states might get involved and what their regulatory framework might look like. What role does the Fed have for systemic risk? And we've provided for that in this bill. So I think it's a very good product. I'm very excited about it. And if we can move this legislation, then our ability to move to a market structure bill is much higher. A market structure bill is much more complex. It regulates the entire industry, not just one version of a digital asset. So it's really important that we do this right so we can move on to something much bigger and something that we need to build even broader consensus around.
Great, thank you, Senator. I'm sure we'll come on to the Genius Act further in the conversation today. Senator Sheehy, over to you in terms of your views on the U.S. and the competitive landscape.
Well, digital currency is going to be the next generation of economic development. I mean, obviously AI is taken off in its own right, but the future of the global economy is going to rest on a fluid cryptocurrency environment that is going to be global in nature. It's not going to respect borders. And I think we really have to upgrade our thinking around how we imagine currency, because I think a lot of folks in America have been approaching it from a very prosaic point of view, which is this seems like it's funny money, it doesn't seem like it's real, there's no value behind it, therefore it has no value. And those are the same arguments we heard against paper currency 150, 200 years ago when folks said that this isn't real currency. And here in America, we need to have a stable regulatory environment that gives a predictable landscape that companies can invest in. Otherwise, they're going to go elsewhere and do it. And if they go elsewhere and do it, we're going to lose that edge as America, and we're going to, unfortunately, wake up in 20 or 30 years and realize that other countries are far beyond us, and then we're going to try to play catch-up. So I believe it's critical for us to work on the Hill now to legislate. It has to come from the legislature because it's got to span administrations. We've got to give a stable and predictable regulatory environment so that people can invest around this and make sure that they have a stable environment, that they can have a 10, 20, 30-year horizon because we want to lead in this. It's going to be fundamental for the next 20 years, and we want to be the leaders.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the point on legislative stability over various terms, I think, is a very important point. Senator Moreno, hear your thoughts.
Well, I guess we have to acknowledge, first of all, that we dodged a bullet on November 5th because we're in a totally different world now where we want to have common sense in this world. We typically think about America as a place where innovation, creativity happens. You're not bound by anything other than your hard work and your perseverance, ... unless you were in the digital asset space in the last 4 years where we were under complete and total assault. I built a group of car dealerships, sold those, and then built a technology company that uses blockchain to digitize the car titling process. Thank God that I did that company before the prior administration because we needed a bill to go through Congress that said that a digital odometer statement was allowed, that you didn't need to have 3 copies with a wet ink. That was the law. Think about how insane that is. There was a law that says you must have not 2 copies, not 4 copies, but 3 copies, and it has to be wet ink signature. We created that. Had that law not passed, my company would not exist, and we wouldn't have saved states hundreds of millions of dollars processing digital titles. We have to recognize that while we all think we're really important here in Washington, D.C., and we know lots of things, we don't know better than the markets, and we don't know better than innovation that's coming before us. Take the case of stablecoins. Imagine for a second, just step back from all the conversation and say this. There's an existential threat to America that we could lose the world reserve currency status for the US dollar. That's a problem. Well, you have a whole industry that's willing to take your dollar and spread it all over the world and cement the fact that the US dollar is the world reserve currency. Is that good or bad? Like, I'm thinking that's pretty damn good. And yet, we've been kneecapping that industry for the last 4 years. So I'm hoping that with the help of my colleague here from New York, who's been a good voice on this, that we get to this very quickly. We get the Genius Act done, we get market structure done quickly, we get a strategic Bitcoin reserve done, and then we learn the lesson that our job here in Washington, D.C. is to create an environment for positive innovation and growth.
Thank you very much. And lastly, but not least, Congressman, I know you've been working as well in the House in terms of the legislative parameters around this space. It'd be great to hear your opening thoughts.
Well, thank you. It's a very exciting time. It's very exciting to me because I keep coming to these thresholds where I say this is world changing. There's this new technology that's always changing the world. I came out of technology. I started out as a research scientist at New York University and did a startup company that I merged with a nascent Yahoo, and we were sure that we were changing the world back then. And you fast forward, I did a lot of investment banking, venture capital, and eventually ran to be the regulator, the securities and insurance regulator for the state of Montana, which was a completely different but very interesting part of this because now I'm dealing as a securities regulator with the ambiguities of Gary Gensler's SEC in this whole this whole genre, not understanding how to deal with cryptocurrencies and in some ways being hostile, but. I'm really excited because the potential that we have right in front of us right now with distributed ledgers, with blockchain, with cryptocurrencies, with artificial intelligence, it's an incredibly exciting time. But one of the things that scares me is the United States of America has always been the center of innovation, the hotbed of innovation. We need to make sure that we continue to foster that innovation here. And a lot of that is how we deal with this on a regulatory basis. I mean, most businesses will understand where you put the bar as long as you're not moving the bar and there's not ambiguity where that bar is. And so I think we need a framework that makes it clear as we start to develop these new industries, I'll say for lack of a better word, this new technology that I think is going to be game-changing economically for businesses. For one of the things that the good senator from Florida mentioned is about
Just like Florida.
Did I say Florida? Okay. About one of the things that really scares me is the dollar not being the global trading currency. What happens? I mean, that's the end of the American dream if that switch is flipped. And so having an environment now where we're trying to really figure out how we can be permissive enough to really be innovative here. when I was a state regulator, one of the things that fell, under my purview was the FTX meltdown. And so we were one of the lead enforcement states under NASA when that was happening, and understanding the need to have, a regulatory framework that invites it to be onshore and something that is still broad enough to make sure that we're being innovative, but has reasonable sideboards to make sure that we don't have another giant meltdown like that. And so I'm just really excited. I know in the House the Stable Act was just released today, so excited about that. And I think this answers a lot of the questions of what we need to make sure that we have the ability to continue innovating in this space and have reasonable sideboards to make sure that we don't have any meltdowns, and really talking to stakeholders to make sure that we're addressing the unintended consequences, make sure that we understand what that all means. But I think the bottom line where I'm coming from this, and a lot of my colleagues, and I'm on the House side on financial services, across Congress, is really finding that sweet spot where we can be innovative, create this economy driving technology. The administration's clearly behind it, and it's an exciting time for me, having gone that full circuit from a researcher to a technologist to venture capitalist to regulator and now the lawmaker. So really excited to be here.
Thank you, Congressman. So let's go into a bit more detail, right, around the inner workings, around how the U.S. positions itself in the global landscape. So first, Senator Gillibrand, you've co-sponsored and championed the Genius Act, and you've emphasized the importance of stablecoins in terms of the U.S.'s financial leadership. So how do you balance creating an environment for innovation that encourages growth while also protecting consumers?
So you want to have the best regulatory framework in the world so that people want to gravitate towards your market. So the reason why New York State, New York City is the center of the world financial markets is because we have very good regulatory schemes for all types of financial services. And we need to continue that tradition. So the most important thing in writing these pieces of legislation is to get it right. And so you want to have it be something that companies can count on, that they have certainty about what the regulation is. You have to understand what the risks are. So for example, let's just say you have a state, I won't give one because I don't want to degrade any state, but let's just say you have a state that doesn't really take financial services seriously. And they decide anybody can be a stablecoin issuer. Joe's Barbecue can be a stablecoin issuer. Sam's Barber can be a stablecoin issuer. Anybody who wants to do it can do it. Well, what happens if they don't actually have a bank account that has $1 sitting there for every $1 worth of stablecoin they issue? What happens if they have a run on their stablecoin and they don't meet the requirements? You'll just have another FTX. You'll have another algorithmic stablecoin that plunges because it never really made sense. That is a huge problem for the US market. It's a huge problem for certainty. So you want to get these regulatory frameworks right. And so what we did was we created two paths, a federal path that is very much based on the current regulatory frameworks under the OCC. And then if you have a state pathway, then you have to prove to the Fed that you are substantially similar to the federal regulatory framework so that you can't have a race to the bottom. It's really important. You want to have a state issuer be serious, thoughtful, know what they're doing. We have one in New York that's very effective, DFS. And so you have to do that. Second, you have to think through what are all the ways this could go wrong. Well, something as simple as how do you define a dollar? Is a treasury the same as a dollar? What happens if your one-to-one backing is all in treasuries and you have an interest rate misalignment like SVB just did, and you have a run on your stable coin and all your dollar backing is in a 3-month treasury that you can't get out of for 3 months? That's a run on your stable coin. That's a collapse. So you have to have a provision that says someone gets to review what type of assets you have that are representing your one-to-one dollar back. You have to say, what happens if the company does collapse? How do you do a bankruptcy? Who gets paid first? Is this insured by the FDIC? Why would it be insured by the FDIC? It's not a bank. Do you want a stablecoin issuer to be able to issue interest? Probably not, because if they're issuing interest, then there's no reason to put your money in a local bank. If there's no reason to put your money in a local bank, who's going to give you a mortgage? Who's going to give the small business a loan? If there's no deposits, small banks can't do that anymore. You'll collapse the financial services system that people rely on for their businesses and their mortgages. So these are the kind of thoughtful questions that have to be asked in advance. You have to write that into the legislation. We troubleshot as much as we could to figure out every scenario that could go wrong, and we put really good reforms in this bill. We had a very vibrant amendment process. A number of senators offered excellent amendments that made the bill even stronger. And so there's a lot of protections for safety and soundness, for transparency, for accountability, for regulatory certainty. And I think it's a good start. The worst thing we could do is water it down. Do not think that a watered down bill is going to help your industry. It will destroy your industry because one more SVB, one more algorithmic stablecoin just continues to create such uncertainty that nobody wants to do business or do business in the United States. So you want good regulatory frameworks. Your smartest lawyers should be reviewing it, giving smart and thoughtful comments. People who don't understand the industry shouldn't be part of legislating. They need to learn it. They need experts, and we have to get it right. It is a law of first impression. That means it's very important that we get it right.
Thank you, Senator. And I think the point on certainty in general is an important one. So, Senator Moreno, you've talked about the concern around regulatory or legislative uncertainty pushing innovators outside of the states. So what are your top priorities when you think about ensuring that blockchain developers, digital assets, innovators stay in-house in the states?
Well, I'll start where my colleague left off. I think it is extremely important to have people who understand the industry being a part of writing this legislation. There's enormous lack of information and knowledge, not for any reason other than this stuff is new in the Senate and Congress generally. I think there's a lot of confusion between what a stablecoin is versus Bitcoin, versus a token, versus a securitized asset. Unless you understand kind of like these are four totally different things, you can't regulate it in the same way. So I think for sure we need people to understand it. We also need people not to be afraid of it. And we also need people not to want to kill it, because that's also problematic. And so what we got to do is, and I think we're there, we just have to get to the finish line. I think we will. I think there's great cooperation now between Democrats and Republicans to land the plane, so to speak, to get us to a point where if you're creating this technology in America, you understand exactly what the rules of the road are going to be. They're common sense, they're reasonable, and we should have, and I agree with Senator Gillibrand very much, we should have the best regulatory regime on earth. We should issue the best assets on earth. Those assets may not always be issued here in America, but if they're issued under an American regulatory regime, they become, by definition, more valuable. So I think that's always been what made our financial system so strong. There's certainly an opportunity to have these companies based here in America, but in a true decentralized finance world, you may not have everybody physically located in the U.S., but if we're following U.S. asset issuing regulations, then it's U.S. assets that are the most valued. And I think if people understand, generally speaking, this is really, really good for the future of U.S. dominance financially around the world, then we'll get to a point of consensus. And I think we're getting there. I think certainly this industry, the Digital Chamber I was a member of 11 years ago, where we took a totally different small group of people and now are a pretty powerful force in Washington, D.C. I think we got to celebrate that too, that's happened in a very short period of time. So it's exciting times. I'm going to lay out the gauntlet. Let's get this done by August, recess. What do you think? We'll get it done? Market structure, Genius Act, SBR done by August, right? What do you guys think? All right, there you go.
You might not get market structure done, but you're definitely going to get stablecoin done.
Stablecoins by the Easter recess. We want
That would be
market structure
great.
by August.
You might.
There you go.
I love a panel that comes with unknown explicit commitments. It's a great way to come out of. No, so
if we're really productive.
fair enough. And I really appreciate the distinction between the operationalization as well as the backing, right, in terms of the stablecoin representation. I think that's very important in terms of how the environment continues to evolve. Shifting to the House briefly on the Stable Act. So can you speak to a little bit more, Congressman Downing, what thought process has gone into the continued development of the Stable Act, the conversations that are happening within the House?
Well, some of the conversations happening right now, some of my concerns, and I think they're adequately addressed, is it comes down to, as my good colleague from New York had mentioned, is understanding how those backings are. Having been a regulator in the past who cared about solvency, who cared about risk-based capital, who cared about reserves, and making sure that that's believable, and everybody absolutely trusts that, because I think that's foundational to this. And again, some of the stuff that we're seeing in the in the Genius Act and on the Senate side of this, and again, the good senator from New York had mentioned this as well, is having that threshold of what can happen on the state side. I think that's really compelling, because we do that in securities already. What's a intrastate offering that is outside of the Securities Act of 1933. So finding that that efficiency where you can do something and have the states decide what works in there. In our bill, I'm pretty happy with it. We've taken a lot of feedback from stakeholders, and some of the things that have already been mentioned here, like not permitting interest to be earned on it. I think that's paramount to the a surviving banking industry, and I think you put it eloquently. Who's going to be doing the loans? I think that's an important part of it, and I'm really excited about the energy behind this. Like I mentioned earlier, it was just released today. I think we're going to have markup fairly quickly. And I think that we start pushing this through, and I think we can beat your August recess and get it.
Nice, a commitment and a competition. This is great.
There you go. Yeah, a little friendly bicameral competition there. We'll see.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. And in terms of maybe changing tack a little bit, let's look at the digital mining space. So, Senator Sheehy, the U.S. has a strong position in terms of global representation of digital mining. Period. What importance do you place on that? And also, how do you think about ensuring energy and infrastructure resilience into the future?
More power, a lot of it, fast. So, the regulatory environment is one piece for anything in the world. In any place you're going to invest, you want to make sure you have a stable rule of law that boxes in your ability to invest on a horizon that's secure. So I think that's table stakes, and that's something everyone to my left is working on. I'm frankly not working on that. I support it. When he gives me the bill, I'll sign it and assume he did it right. What I'm focusing on is structural energy upgrades in this country. So just yesterday I had a great meeting with Chris Wright, who's our new Secretary of Energy. Him and I served on some boards together before, so I've known him for several years. And Andy Kim, who's our new senator from New Jersey, and I went over there as a bipartisan team to sit down and say, how are we going to structurally upgrade our power availability in this country? Because we're going to see a logarithmic increase in needs between AI, between quantum computing, between everything related to your industry. The power consumption requirements are going to be exponential in increase over the next 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. And right now we have a grid that's a century old, sometimes more than that around this country. And unfortunately, things that relate to your industry have nothing to do with ones and zeros and genius hackers. We need big steel towers with power lines on them and concrete footings. Stuff like that matters to your industry. It may not seem like it, but it does. You need enough electricity to run your industry, and we don't have that right now. Right now, to lay a new power line across public land, the permitting process is literally decades, and the litigation process on the back end of that can make projects completely untenable. Just the simple availability of electricity. My main focus is nuclear. We have the cleanest, greenest, most unlimited form of energy in mankind, which we paid to invent here in America, which we've essentially banned from existence over the last 35 years to our own demise. And now we're realizing we better bootstrap and kickstart our nuclear industry yet again, because that's the only way we're going to be able to meet. Wind turbines and solar panels are not going to give us what we need. And as long as we have a challenge with coal mining, nuclear is our best answer. So I'm looking at every possible way we can get more energy into the grid, upgrade our grid, and that's going to require permitting reform. That's going to require a regulatory environment that allows people to invest in an energy infrastructure, no different than we just talked about here with regard to blockchain technologies, is an infrastructure that private entities, the private sector is our solution to all this. The government has to get out of the way and pave a runway and say, go run and go fast. Private industry will take care of it. But they need to have predictability that they can invest billions of dollars into power infrastructure that's not going to get regulated out of existence after they've built it. Keystone XL is a perfect example. Billions of dollars laid out, decades of permitting and planning, undone at the last minute, and companies said, why would I ever invest in a long-term, multi-billion-dollar energy infrastructure project ever again? So that's what I'm focused on, is permitting reform and regulatory framework around giving us the electricity we need to grow the vital industries, AI, quantum computing, blockchain, crypto, mining, everything that we're going to need for the next 20 years to stay dominant.
Okay. No, I think that's really, really interesting. And I think the private industry collaborations, public-private partnership collaboration, I think is critical. I really appreciate the three dimensions that have come out of this, right? One, energy; two, regulatory certainty; and Senator Gillibrand, as you referred to, certainty in terms of protecting the risks associated with the innovation side as well. So I know we have a few more minutes. I'm going to ask for kind of a fire round for a quick response. Coming back to this public-private partnership, what do you see that environment looking like? What would your ideal state be in the course of the next, let's say, 12 to 24 months of how the legislative components of the regulatory framework components interacts with the industry? Because I think that will inform, I'm sure that attendees today will be very interested in understanding how you see that evolving. So perhaps we'll work our way down the line. So Congressman Downing, I'll start with you.
Well, I just think we need to be very bold about that. I mean, problems are solved in the private industry. Governments normally get in the way, figure out how we can actually partner and pave the way for those structures. And I think we need to be open to that and permissive to that, because I think that's how we're going to solve it. Some of the issues that the good senator from Montana had mentioned about power generation, I agree 100%. We need to burn coal, we need to burn oil, we need to burn gas, we need to put up nuclear power plants, we need to do hydro, we need to do everything. But the other part is we need to figure out how we're going to get it from point A to point B, because every data center is not going to be near the source of generation, and we've got a grid that can't handle that right now, and we have competition that is going to have a less restrictive permitting environment, and they're going to blow us out of the water if we don't find a way to keep up.
Thank you. Senator Gillibrand?
Well, on the energy side, I do think proximity is important, so I would really focus on small modular nuclear plants, because they can be portable, so it's not even a plant. So, and it's also a huge issue for AI. As you know, AI consumes enormous power, and if we want to be able to use AI, we're going to need generation for that one function. And I think the greatest opportunity we have, because of our grid challenges, is small nuclear reactors. The second issue about public-private partnerships, when we get to the market structure bill, we are looking at different structures for, oftentimes a digital asset might present initially as a security, but over time it becomes more of a commodity. Who decides when you've shifted and who your regulator is? It's a very important question to answer, and we've wrestled with 3 or 4 different ways to do it. Nobody really quite knows the perfect way. But one of the things we had in our first bill was it's similar to a regulating organization, an SRO. And we designated who would be part of the SRO. So someone from the Fed, somebody from Treasury, someone from OCC, somebody from NIST, somebody from SEC and CFTC. So that is much more akin to what we do in the financial services industry, where we have SROs doing lots of self-monitoring of their industries, creating best practices. And I think that's one of the best ways where public-private partnerships can be extremely helpful, because you're getting constant input from the private sector about how to create regulatory environments that are effective, efficient, and nimble. And so I can imagine that will be some areas of debate. How do you create sandboxes? How do you create review processes? And that might be where you have additional participation from the private sector, from industry participants, because they might be at the forefront of knowing what the technology and the innovation is, more so than any given regulator. So that might be an area where public-private partnerships will be particularly relevant for this industry and for the broader ecosystem that we will be addressing in market structure.
Very nice, thank you. Senator Moreno?
I'd say 3 really quick things. Number 1, if your digital asset has a CEO, it's not a commodity by definition. Number 2 is we have to understand that the current system isn't perfect. 70 years ago, there was money laundering, there was drug trafficking, all kinds of financial misactivities. In fact, the number one way all those industries live is with the US dollar. I haven't heard a lot of comments about banning paper dollars. So we're never going to get to perfect. And I think we have to have the humility here in Washington, D.C. to understand that. Number three, once we write a bill that says this is the rules of the road, then let the private sector go, let innovation go. When things inevitably happen, and they will, things will go wrong. It doesn't require a massive overreaction because, again, the current financial system allows a lot of incredibly bad behavior despite decades of regulations on top of regulations. So don't judge the digital asset space somehow differently from the non-digital space just because it's new. I think that mentality is really, really important.
Thank you very much. Senator Sheehy?
Speed, we got to go faster. Speed, we have to go faster.
True in form and in word.
So April, I heard April, Genius Act, August, market structure bill, let's go.
And panels are where those decisions are made, as we all know, so fantastic. Well, please offer a round of applause to our panelists today. Thank you very much.